Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The voices in the dimly lit room clashed against one another, maps spread out, fingers pointing, tempers spiking. Men leaned over the table, their shadows stretching like blades across the walls. The fan above whined against the heavy silence between bursts of orders. Yet, when her hand reached for the edge of the map, steady, deliberate, no one looked. She stayed quiet, eyes down, breathing measured. She had learned long ago that silence in rooms like this was its own weapon. They thought she was only listening. They had no idea how much she remembered, how much she already knew. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The colonel's voice cracked through the room, sharp as gravel dragged across metal. Coordinates, time frames, extraction points. His eyes swept past her as if she were part of the wall. That used to sting. Not anymore. Indifference had become her armor. Still, a flicker inside her chest burned, a small flame of something rower. Not anger, not pride, something more dangerous. Loss. The kind that never left. The kind that whispered in the quiet, in the dark, when the others had finally laid their rifles down. The briefing ended in a scatter of chairs and boots. Cigarettes were lit. Radios crackled. Outside, the sky was iron gray, the wind carrying the smell of dust and oil. She stayed behind, her palms still pressed to the map. The room emptied. Only the low hum of fluorescent lights remained. That was when she let herself breathe. Deep, controlled, like she was trying to inhale the entire plan into her lungs. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. On paper, she was just another operative rotated into this unit, a replacement for a man whose name was barely remembered. But paper didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet deal she'd made, something only 2 people in the world knew about. And one of them was dead. She slid the strap of her rifle higher on her shoulder, stepped outside and into the courtyard. Dust rose under every boot. Trucks coughed black smoke. Soldiers leaned against walls, helmets tipped back, laughing too loud, masking their nerves. A group gathered around a crate, playing cards with hands that trembled when no one was watching. Her eyes scanned everything, not out of paranoia, out of habit. She saw the tremor in a young recruit's fingers as he lit his cigarette. She noticed the older sergeant's glance at a folded photo tucked in his vest pocket, his wife, maybe, or a daughter. She saw the mechanic rubbing a grease-stained rag between his hands as if it might wash away his fear. They were all carrying something. Everyone was. No one carried it the way she did. A voice broke the hum of the courtyard. "Hey, Ghost." She turned. The nickname still caught her off guard, though it had followed her through more countries than she could count. A tall man leaned against the hood of a jeep, his grin quick, too easy for a place like this. Callahan, recon, always talking, always watching when people thought he was. "Colonel didn't even glance your way in there," he said, flicking his cigarette into the dirt. "Bet he'll regret that." She didn't answer. He didn't expect her to. That was the rhythm they'd found, his words, her silence. But silence wasn't empty. Because when she finally spoke, it meant something. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "about what comes after?" Callahan tilted his head. The grin faded. "After the mission?" No, her eyes met his, steady. "After all of it." The question hung between them. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin. She saw the truth flicker in his face. He thought about it too. They all did. Some nights when the gunfire stopped and the desert fell still, the silence pressed so hard it became unbearable. She remembered those nights. She remembered one night in particular, the weight of a letter in her pocket, the kind that changed everything. But she pushed it away. Not yet. Instead, she adjusted her rifle, nodded at him, and walked on. The nickname followed her like a shadow. Ghost. Not because she was unseen, but because she carried things no one else could. The convoy rolled out at dawn. Engines coughed, metal rattled, and the horizon stretched endless, unforgiving. Inside the armored truck, the air was thick with sweat, fuel, and unspoken words. She sat by the window, her eyes tracing the shifting dunes, the ruins scattered like broken teeth across the land. Every vibration of the road jolted through her body, but her mind drifted elsewhere, to a different room, a different table, a different voice, the last voice of someone she could never bring back. Her jaw tightened. She focused on the sound of the engine, the clink of dog tags, the steady rhythm of her breath. Then sudden silence. The convoy slowed, shouts outside. The driver cursed under his breath. Through the slit of glass she saw a figure on the road ahead, standing still, unmoving. A boy, no older than 12. His hands were empty, his eyes dark, hollow, locked on the convoy. The soldiers muttered. Fingers twitched near triggers. The boy didn't move. The wind whipped dust between them, a curtain of uncertainty. She leaned forward, her heartbeat sharp in her ears. Something was wrong. She couldn't place it, not yet. The commander barked an order. The trucks lurched forward, engines groaning. The boy stayed still, too still. Her breath caught. Her hand went to her rifle. But it was too late. The explosion tore the air apart. Fire, metal shrieking, sand rising in a furious storm. The world twisted into soundless chaos, bodies thrown, glass shattered, screams lost in the roar. She hit the floor of the truck, her shoulder slamming into steel, ears ringing. Smoke filled her lungs. She pushed up, disoriented, blood warm on her temple. The boy was gone. The road was fire. Her eyes darted across the wreckage, soldiers scrambling, dragging the wounded, shouting names. Some answered, some didn't. Callahan stumbled into view, coughing, his face streaked with blood. He grabbed her arm, his eyes wide. Ambush. She already knew, the ridge above, shadows moving, the glint of rifles catching the sun. And in that chaos, in the fire and smoke and screams, she felt something colder than fear. Recognition. Because the way the trap had been set, the way the attack unfolded, it wasn't random. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate, precise. Someone had studied them. And the signature was one she knew. Her heart clenched, her breath stilled. It couldn't be. But deep inside she knew. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm behind her eyes. And if she was right, this mission was more than survival. It was personal. What did she see in that smoke that froze her blood? Not the fire, not the broken bodies sprawled across sand and steel, not the desperate scramble of soldiers trying to drag the wounded behind cover while bullets tore the air apart. No, what stopped her breath was the angle of the first shot, the way it cracked through the dust like a razor. Too precise, too patient. A sniper's hand. She pressed herself against the side of the wrecked truck, metal hot against her cheek, the world narrowing into fragments of sound, the deafening crack of rifles, the clatter of boots, the guttural orders shouted into chaos. And underneath it all, the ringing in her ears, the steady thud of her own heart. Callahan slid down beside her, blood streaking his temple, rifle trembling in his hands. His voice came broken between coughs. They knew we were coming. This isn't random. She didn't answer. He wouldn't have heard her anyway. Smoke swallowed words here. But inside, the truth twisted like a knife. She'd seen this before. The pattern of fire, the patience, the coldness in execution. Someone she had once trusted. Someone who had taught her how to read a battlefield like this. The thought almost broke her. Almost, but breaking wasn't an option, not now. On your left, a soldier screamed. Automatic fire ripped past. Sand spat up like angry waves. She pivoted, rifle to shoulder, breath steady despite the pounding in her chest. One target in sight, squeeze, a flash, silence. Another shadow crumpled down the ridge. The world slowed for a moment. The smell of gunpowder sharp, the copper tang of blood in the air, the rough edges of her gloves biting into her skin. She felt every detail too vividly, like time had cracked open. And in that strange clarity she remembered another day, a training ground, A voice behind her, calm and steady, telling her to slow down, not to rush the trigger. Patience is deadlier than speed. Wait, then strike. The voice of the man who had betrayed them. She shut the memory out before it could choke her. Focus, stay alive. The unit fought hard, but the ambush had been planned too well. They were outnumbered, pinned. One truck burning, another disabled, casualties mounting. Her eyes swept the battlefield, calculating cover, angles, lines of retreat. She saw a young soldier, a recruit barely shaving age, frozen in the open, hands clutching his rifle but feet refusing to move. Fear locked him in place. His eyes were wide, drowning in the firestorm. Without thinking, she broke cover. Sand blistered under her boots, rounds hissing past like wasps. She slammed into him, forcing him down behind a shattered doorframe. His chest heaved, panic spilling from him like air from a punctured lung. "You breathe," she told him, her voice low, sharp, steady. "Now, right now, you breathe or you die." His gaze locked on hers. For a moment, she saw herself reflected there. The same fear she once carried years ago, before she learned how to bury it deep. The boy nodded, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. He inhaled, shaky but real. "Good," she whispered. Then her rifle barked again, clearing the path just enough for him to crawl back to the medic. Small victory, but it mattered. In wars like these, survival was carved from inches. Minutes stretched like hours. The firefight raged. Then finally, the enemy fire began to thin. Shadows on the ridge pulled back, melting into the horizon. A retreat fast, organized. Not fear, not loss, strategy. They'd done what they came to do: strike hard, send a message, leave survivors to remember. Silence fell heavy, broken only by groans of the wounded and the crackle of flames eating through twisted metal. Dust drifted like smoke from a dying candle. She stood slowly, rifle still in hand, scanning the ridge long after it had emptied. Her jaw clenched tight enough to ache, because deep in her bones she knew this wasn't over. The unit worked quickly, triage, securing the perimeter, dragging bodies from wreckage. The air stank of fuel and iron. Someone cried quietly, almost hidden, until the sound broke into silence. She helped where she could, binding a tourniquet, steadying hands that shook too hard to hold gauze. No words, just movement, quiet efficiency. But her mind was elsewhere. The boy on the road, the explosion, the signature ambush, and the ghost of a voice she couldn't shake. She walked away from the others just far enough that no one noticed. Kneeling in the sand, she pressed her hand into the dirt, still warm from fire, still trembling from violence. And in the grain of it, she felt the weight of choice. If she told them what she suspected, that the ambush bore the mark of someone she had once known, they'd question her, doubt her, maybe even turn on her. If she stayed silent, they'd walk blind into another trap. The conflict twisted inside her, a storm behind her quiet eyes. Footsteps crunched behind her. She didn't move. Callahan's voice, softer now, reached her. "You saw something, didn't you?" She didn't answer. "You always see things before the rest of us," he pressed. "You knew this wasn't random the second it started." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say the name, to break the silence that bound her, but the sound lodged deep, unspoken, because saying it would make it real. Instead, she rose, brushing sand from her gloves, and looked out at the horizon. The sun dipped lower, painting the battlefield in dying light. "Get everyone ready," she said, her voice steady but cold. "They'll hit us again." He studied her, suspicion flickering in his eyes, but he didn't push. He nodded, then walked back toward the others. She stood alone, staring at the ridge. Her heart pounded with the weight of memory, because the truth was unbearable. The ambush had been led by him. The same man who had once stood at her side, who had once taught her patience, precision, survival. The same man whose death she had once prayed for, and whose survival now hunted her like a shadow. The one she could never forgive. And now, the one she would have to face. The wind rose, carrying the last echoes of gunfire across the sand. It sounded almost like a voice, a whisper. Her name. She closed her eyes, the storm tightening inside. Because she knew the truth, and she knew the cost. This mission wasn't about orders anymore. It was about unfinished business. How much weight could one person carry before it broke them? The night pressed heavy against the ruins, the desert sky wide and indifferent, stars scattered like fragments of glass above their camp. Fires burned low, casting flickering shadows across faces that looked more like masks than men. The battlefield was quiet now, too quiet, the kind of silence that didn't heal, it haunted. She sat apart from the others, rifle across her knees, the taste of sand still in her mouth. Her hands ached from gripping too tightly, but she couldn't let go. If she loosened her hold, if she gave her body even an inch of rest, her mind would open, and she couldn't allow that. Not here, not tonight. Around the fire, the survivors murmured in low voices. Someone cursed the colonel for leading them straight into a trap. Someone else asked if command even cared how many names they had just lost. No one answered. No one ever did. She glanced toward the medic's corner where the young recruit, the boy she had pulled from the open, lay on a stretcher. His chest rose shallow, bandages tight around his ribs. His eyes fluttered open now and then, searching the darkness like he expected it to move. Fear hadn't left him. It never left the first time. She remembered that. Callahan sat nearby, smoke curling from a half-burned cigarette, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. He looked older tonight, the easy grin gone, replaced by something quieter. A man carrying weight he hadn't expected. "You haven't said a word since we stopped," he said finally, his voice low enough to keep it between them. She didn't answer. Silence was safer. But silence had a cost. Because inside the storm churned. Images looping, the boy in the road, the fire, the sniper's precision, and the memory of another place, another night when a man she trusted had put his hand on her shoulder and said, "Watch the horizon. It always tells the truth before anyone else does." He had taught her patience. He had taught her silence. And now he was using both against her. Callahan exhaled smoke into the night, watching it drift. "You knew," he muttered. "I saw it on your face. The second that first shot hit, you recognized it." Her chest tightened. She could feel the words pressing against her throat, desperate to be spoken, but if she said them out loud, it would make them real. It would change everything. Instead, she said only, "We'll move at first light. They're not finished." Callahan's jaw flexed. He wanted more, but he didn't push. Not tonight. A gust of wind swept through camp, carrying the smell of smoke and iron. It curled around her like a reminder. She pulled her jacket tighter, though the cold wasn't what made her shiver. Hours passed. Men dozed where they sat, rifles clutched tight even in sleep. The fire died low. The desert whispered. But she didn't sleep, couldn't. Because in the quiet, memories bled through. Years ago, another mission. A storm not of sand but rain, heavy and relentless. She was younger then, less scarred, still believing that loyalty meant safety. He had been beside her, the man she now hunted, his voice calm even when the world around them screamed. "You move too fast," he'd told her, crouched behind cover, bullets slicing the air. "You'll waste yourself before you even begin." She had hated him then for slowing her down, until his patience saved them both. Until she learned that silence could kill louder than any gun. She trusted him, learned from him, followed him. And then betrayal. The why of it still burned her. She had never been given an answer, just a silence deeper than any she had known. And now here he was again, not a ghost, not a memory, a living enemy. She closed her eyes, fists clenched until her nails bit skin. If she faced him again, she didn't know whether she wanted to kill him or demand the truth he had stolen. The horizon blushed faintly with dawn. The unit stirred, groaning as joints cracked, voices rough with exhaustion. Orders whispered. weapons checked. They moved out quietly, leaving behind the burned wrecks and blood-stained sand like they had never been there at all. But the land remembered. It always did. The convoy was smaller now, patched trucks groaning under their weight. Every soldier carried more than their gear. They carried absence, the kind that made silence heavier than sound. She sat near the back, eyes scanning the ridges, every flicker of movement, every shadow. Her nerves were raw, strung tight like wire. She knew they'd be tested again. The enemy didn't waste opportunities. Beside her, Callahan tried to break the silence. "When this is done, when we get out, what's the first thing you'll do?" She kept her eyes on the horizon. "Breathe." He huffed a laugh hollow. "Yeah, that'd be nice." A pause. He looked at her, more serious now. "You've lost someone, haven't you?" Her chest tightened. She didn't turn, didn't let him see the flicker in her eyes. "Everyone here has," he added quickly, as if to soften the question. "It's the only reason any of us keep going. We're all chasing something we'll never get back." She wanted to tell him, wanted to say the name, wanted to explain that this wasn't just about loss, it was about betrayal, about a ghost who still breathed, but her throat closed around the words. Instead, she let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence was easier than truth. The convoy slowed near a cluster of abandoned buildings, crumbling stone and shattered windows staring like blind eyes into the desert. The colonel ordered a halt. Scouts fanned out. The place was too quiet, too still. She stepped down, boots sinking into dust, senses sharp. The air smelled stale, untouched, but something was wrong. She could feel it. Her eyes swept the rooftops. Shadows shifted, not birds, not wind. She raised her rifle. Then crack, a shot split the morning. A soldier dropped, blood misting the air. Shouts erupted, chaos, again. But this time she knew exactly where it came from. The angle, the timing, the precision. Her scope locked onto the rooftop across the street. A figure crouched, rifle gleaming in the sun. She couldn't see his face, not fully, but the stance, the patience, the stillness. It was him. Her breath caught. The world narrowed to that one image. The man she once trusted. The man who had taught her everything she knew. Alive, watching her. And in that frozen heartbeat, as the battle erupted again, she felt the storm inside split wide open. Because now there was no denying it. This wasn't war, this wasn't orders, this was personal. And it was only beginning. Why didn't she pull the trigger? Her crosshairs held him, perfectly aligned. Breath steady, finger curled against the trigger. The rooftop figure barely moved, his rifle shifting with the same precision he had once taught her. She could end it now. A single shot, a single choice. But she froze. The battlefield roared around her, shouts, gunfire, the desperate scramble of men diving for cover. But all she saw was him. All she heard was the echo of his voice, not in her headset, not in the chaos, but in her memory. Patience. Wait. Let the shot come to you. It had been his lesson, his gift, and now, against everything she believed, it stayed her hand. A burst of fire chewed stone inches from her head. She snapped back to cover, the air punched from her lungs. Callahan shouted something, dragging a wounded soldier behind a wall. The colonel's orders crackled through radios, sharp but fraying at the edges. She pressed her back against cold stone, her chest heaving. Why hadn't she taken the shot? Fear? No, it wasn't fear, it was something worse. Recognition, memory, the part of her that still wanted answers more than blood. But answers were dangerous. Another shot rang out. A medic screamed. The boy she had saved earlier was on the ground again, clutching his leg, dirt darkening with blood. She didn't think, she moved. Sliding into the open, she hauled him by his vest, dragging him across the sand while rounds hissed past. The world blurred into fragments, shards of glass falling from windows above, the sting of grit in her teeth, the weight of his body against her shoulder. Every muscle screamed. Every instinct warned she was a heartbeat from death. But she kept moving. A round tore through the dirt inches from her hand. She heard the crack of his rifle. Her body froze for half a breath. Was it aimed at her? At the boy? No, deliberate. A warning. He had missed her on purpose. Her pulse slammed. She reached cover, pulling the boy into the medic's arms. His cries split the air, raw and desperate but alive. Her own hands shook as she reloaded, breath ragged. Why would he miss? Why, after setting fire to her world, after betraying everything they'd once fought for, why would he spare her? The question clawed at her chest as the firefight dragged on. One by one, they pushed the enemy back, forcing them into the maze of broken buildings. Grenades thumped, smoke curling through shattered walls. The air grew thick, unbreathable, every corner a question mark. Callahan stumbled to her side, face streaked with soot, voice harsh. "We're getting slaughtered. We need a way out." Her eyes swept the rooftops again, but the sniper was gone, vanished, like a shadow dissolving with the light. She swallowed hard. He's pulling them back. It's not over. Callahan frowned. He. She froze. She hadn't meant to say it. But the slip was out, hanging between them. Callahan's eyes narrowed. He studied her, confusion and suspicion burning. He opened his mouth, but the colonel's barked orders cut through, commanding movement, regroup. She turned away quickly, hiding her face behind the scope. If Callahan pressed, if he asked again, she didn't know what she would say. The unit regrouped, battered, bloodied, but breathing. Casualties too many to count. The colonel's voice was all steel, no sorrow. He called for a push forward into the buildings to root out whoever remained. But she knew better. She knew the enemy was already gone. The colonel didn't see it, but she did. The marks of withdrawal, the deliberate silence left behind, like a signature. It was him, always him. And if he was here, it wasn't by chance. She let herself drift back for just a moment, to the first time she had met him, a rain-soaked airstrip. Her boots too new, her uniform stiff with nerves. He had been older, already carved by years of war, eyes sharp but not cruel. He had extended a hand without a word, and when she hesitated, he'd said, "It's not weakness to be afraid. It's weakness to pretend you're not." That had been the first time she'd believed someone saw her. Now, years later, she wished she could erase it. Night fell again. They took shelter in the ruins, broken walls shielding them from the open sky. Fires burned low, shadows dancing against stone. The wounded moaned softly. Some men prayed under their breath, words cracked and halting. She sat apart as always, cleaning her rifle in silence. But every scrape of the cloth, every click of metal, echoed too loud in her head. Callahan approached, lowering himself onto the rubble beside her. His movements were slower now, heavy with exhaustion. He held a flask, offered it without a word. She shook her head. He drank instead. Finally, he spoke. "I don't care what the colonel says. That wasn't just an ambush. That was something else." She didn't answer. He studied her profile, the way her jaw tightened, the flicker in her eyes. "You know who it was, don't you?" Her hand stilled on the rifle. For a heartbeat, the silence stretched, dangerous. Then she forced herself to move again, cloth gliding along the barrel as if nothing had cracked. But Callahan wasn't blind. He leaned closer, voice low. "If you're keeping something from us, if you're keeping something from me, you'd better have a damn good reason." She didn't look at him, couldn't. Because the truth wasn't ready to be spoken, not yet. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, "Sometimes silence is the only weapon you have left." Callahan stared at her, searching for meaning, but she gave him nothing more. The fire popped, the night deepened. And in the quiet she felt eyes on her, not Callahan's, not the soldiers'. Him. Somewhere in the darkness, she knew he was still watching. Not hunting, not yet. Waiting. The storm inside her coiled tighter, pressing against her ribs, suffocating. She closed her eyes, listening to the night, to the silence between heartbeats. And she knew one thing with terrifying certainty. This wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a test. And she was the target. The dawn broke, but it didn't bring light. The sky was a dull, colorless gray, like ash smeared across the horizon. The ruins around them lay quiet, too quiet, the silence carrying weight instead of peace. Smoke still curled faintly from shattered windows. The air smelled of iron and soot and something else, suspicion. The unit stirred slowly, men moving like shadows. No one laughed, no one spoke more than a whisper. They had survived the night, but survival wasn't victory. It was waiting, stretched thin, each breath heavy with the question of how much longer. The colonel stood near the broken archway, scanning maps with a fury he could barely conceal. His jaw worked, teeth grinding with the effort to keep composure. He gave orders short and clipped, his words slashing through the air like blades. But they weren't cutting fear away anymore. They were cutting trust. She watched from the edge of the rubble, rifle across her knees. Her eyes tracked the colonel, then drifted to the men. The way they looked at each other, the way some of them avoided her gaze, the whispers carried when they thought she couldn't hear. They were beginning to suspect. And suspicion was a fire, small at first, but once it caught, it consumed. Callahan approached, his boots crunching softly in the dirt. He carried himself with that same mix of exhaustion and stubborn defiance, as if nothing could break him, but his eyes betrayed him. They were sharp, searching, restless. He sat beside her without a word. For a moment, they just listened to the silence. Then quietly he said, "You saw him again, didn't you?" Her breath stilled. He didn't look at her. He just kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, voice calm, almost too calm. "The way you froze yesterday, the way you looked at those rooftops, I know what I saw." She swallowed, forcing her face blank. "You saw me saving one of our men." "I saw more than that." His jaw tightened. "Who is he to you?" The question landed like a strike. Her hands clenched around the rifle. Words pressed against her lips, burning to escape, but no. Not here, not now. The truth was a knife. If she pulled it free, it would cut everyone around her. So she stayed silent. Callahan finally turned to her, eyes hard. "I've had your back since the day we started this damn operation. But if you're hiding something that could get us killed—" "Enough!" The colonel's bark cut through the air, startling them both. His glare swept across the unit, daring anyone to breathe too loudly. "We move in 10. Sweep every building, every shadow. We're not waiting for them to strike again." Orders given. No room for argument. The men gathered their gear. Her hands moved automatically, loading, checking, cleaning, but her mind was elsewhere. It drifted back to another mission, another morning. Rain again. Always rain in those memories. She and him crouched side by side in the mud, their rifles steady, eyes fixed on a village below. A target hidden among civilians. A shot she didn't want to take. She remembered whispering, "There has to be another way." And his voice, calm, steady, unyielding. "War doesn't wait for another way." But later, when the order came, he had lowered her rifle, taken the shot himself, shielded her from the weight of it. That was the man she had trusted. That was the man who had taught her mercy even as he delivered death. And now, he was the one turning rifles against them. The thought dug into her chest like barbed wire. They moved out. The ruins swallowed them quickly, the walls closing in, the streets narrowing. Every corner felt like a trap, every doorway a throat waiting to close. The silence pressed down harder with every step. Then it shattered. A burst of gunfire erupted from above. Bullets rained down, ricocheting off stone. The unit scattered, shouts ripping through the air. Men dove for cover, returned fire cracking back. Dust filled the street. Inside, the colonel roared. They surged into a half-collapsed building, shadows twisting around them. The walls closed tight, the hallways choking with dust and smoke. The firefight became claustrophobic, each shot deafening, each flash of light blinding in the dark. She moved through the narrow halls like a ghost, every sense alive, rifle steady. Her pulse pounded in her ears. A figure emerged from the dust, rifle raised. She fired first. The man dropped. Another came. Callahan caught him, knife flashing in the dim. The fight was close, brutal, desperate. Boots scuffed against stone, breath ragged, grunts and cries echoing too loud in the confined space. And then silence again. She pressed against a wall, chest heaving. Her eyes searched the shadows. And that's when she felt it. The gaze. She turned sharply. Down the corridor beyond the dust he stood. For a moment time fractured. The gunfire faded, the shouts blurred. There was only him. He didn't raise his rifle, didn't move. Just stood there watching her, his face half hidden by shadow but his eyes clear, piercing. Recognition slammed into her like a blow. It was him. No doubt, no question. The man who had once been her anchor, her teacher, her shield. And now her enemy. Her breath caught, her finger curled against the trigger. But once again, she didn't fire. The colonel's voice tore through the corridor. Clear this building. She blinked and he was gone. Vanished into shadow, like smoke dissolving in air. Her knees almost gave beneath her. She pressed her back against the wall, rifle trembling in her grip. Callahan appeared at her side, eyes sharp. He had seen her freeze, again. He opened his mouth, fury in his face. But before he could speak, the colonel stormed past, barking orders, pushing them deeper into the ruins. The moment passed, swallowed by chaos. But the damage was done. Callahan's eyes stayed on her, full of suspicion now, full of questions he wouldn't let die. And she knew her silence was crumbling. The truth was a storm pressing at the walls, and soon it would break. The ruins lay quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was that fragile, dangerous quiet that comes after fire burns out, when embers still glow, when smoke still lingers. Everyone knew it wouldn't last. Inside the crumbling building, the unit gathered, exhausted bodies slumped against cold stone. Rifles leaned against walls, helmets hung from fingertips. The air reeked of sweat, smoke, and something sharper, distrust. She sat in the corner, knees drawn up, rifle balanced across her lap. Her eyes traced the cracks in the walls, the shifting dust in pale beams of light. She heard whispers behind her, a laugh cut too short, silence that followed too long. The colonel paced like a caged animal. His map was torn, stained with dirt and blood, but he still studied it as if sheer force could change it. His voice had lost its steadiness. It snapped now, sharp, brittle, cracking like glass under pressure. "We move at first light," he muttered. "We push west, cut them off. We don't give them another chance." But his men didn't look at the map anymore. They looked at him with hollow eyes, the kind that questioned but didn't dare ask. And when their eyes slid away, they found her. Callahan watched longest. When the colonel finally left to brood in silence, Callahan crossed the room and crouched in front of her. His face was close, voice low, the kind that pressed instead of asked. "You froze again." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't." "Don't lie to me." His eyes burned. "I saw him, you saw him, who the hell is he?" The words landed heavy, echoing louder than the gunfire that had shaken the walls hours before. Her chest tightened. The storm inside her roared, pressing against her ribs, demanding to be released. She wanted to tell him, to unload it, to cut her silence open and let it spill. But the weight of memory held her tongue. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Then make me understand." His hands clenched against his knees. "You're putting us all at risk. If you keep holding back, it's going to get one of us killed, maybe all of us." She looked away, eyes finding the broken window, the smear of fading light outside. And then quietly she said, "He was mine." Callahan stilled. She breathed deep, her chest aching with the words she never thought she'd speak aloud again. "Not in the way you think. He was my partner, my teacher. He kept me alive when I should have been gone a dozen times over. Every shot I take, every decision I make, I learned it from him. Callahan's eyes narrowed, and now he's on the other side. Her throat tightened. I don't know why, I don't know how, but yes. The silence between them stretched, long, suffocating. Finally, Callahan rose slowly. His voice was quiet but sharp, a knife hidden in calm. Then you'd better figure out which side you're on, because out here, hesitation kills. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the words she couldn't take back. Her hands shook. She gripped the rifle tighter as if it could ground her, but her chest felt hollow, scraped raw. Across the room, one of the younger soldiers, barely more than a boy, freckles still scattered across his nose, sat with his back to the wall, eyes vacant. His name was Rivas. He rarely spoke, always followed orders, always kept his head down. Tonight, though, he whispered to no one in particular. "My brother used to build kites," he murmured, voice soft, distant. "Back home. He'd chase them through the fields. Said the sky was the only place he felt free." His voice cracked. He rubbed a hand over his face. "I wonder if he still does, or if he stopped when I left." No one answered. The silence honored him. But she felt his words sink deep. Small fragments of life, fragile, too human for war. And yet they were the things that clung hardest when the world fell apart. The night stretched long. Shifts rotated, footsteps paced, shadows crawled across the walls. She couldn't sleep. Every time her eyes closed, she saw him standing in the smoke, watching her. The storm of memory twisted, pulling her back. She remembered the night he saved her. A mission gone wrong years ago, trapped in a collapsed building, enemies closing in, no way out. She had thought it was over. She had thought her story ended there. But he had dragged her out, breathless, bloodied, refusing to let her die. "You don't give up," he had whispered to her. "Not here, not now, not ever." She remembered the weight of his hand on hers, the strength he gave when she had none. And now that same hand was raised against her. She sat in the silence, head bowed, trembling with the weight of it. Callahan's words echoed, "Which side are you on?" When dawn bled into the ruins, pale light slipping through cracks, the colonel returned with orders. His voice was iron again, his fury forced into steel. "We strike west," he declared. "They won't expect us to move so soon. We'll cut through their supply line, end this before it drags further." The men obeyed, but their eyes told the truth. They were tired, worn thin, breaking. And as they readied, Callahan's gaze caught hers once more. Not anger this time, something harder, resolve. He would not let her silence slide again. She knew it, she felt it. The storm inside her had no more walls to hide behind. And as the unit prepared to march, she realized the choice was coming. Too fast, too sharp, too soon. And when it did, there would be no silence left to keep. The road west was nothing but bones. Charred husks of vehicles lined the path, their twisted frames reaching out like skeletons in the gray dawn. The earth itself seemed scorched, blackened by fire, pocked with scars from shells that had fallen too many times. Nothing lived here, not even birds. Boots crunched in the silence. The unit moved in tight formation, eyes scanning every shadow, every ruin. Their breaths fogged in the cold morning air, the sound loud in a world otherwise dead. The colonel marched at the front, jaw locked, eyes fierce. His pace was too fast for men this tired, but no one dared ask him to slow. His fury was momentum now, and they were dragged in its wake. Behind him, Callahan kept close, his eyes never straying far from her. He didn't hide it anymore. His suspicion was open now, steady, unblinking. It pressed against her like weight she couldn't shed. Every step was harder, not from the march, but from the storm inside her chest. She couldn't shake his last words. "Which side are you on?" The air felt colder, the silence heavier, and then gunfire. It ripped from the ruins ahead, sharp and sudden. Bullets tore through the column. Men dove for cover, cries breaking the fragile silence. Contact front. The street erupted. Fire came from broken windows, from rooftops, from shadows unseen. The colonel roared orders, voice raw, driving them forward through the storm. She dropped to her knee, rifle raised. Her scope cut through dust and smoke. A figure flashed, she fired. Another. Another. The world narrowed to recoil and breath and blood. Callahan was beside her, firing steady bursts, his movements sharp, efficient. The firefight dragged long, brutal. Every street turned into a trap, every doorway a wound. Men fell, screams cutting through the roar of rifles. And then she saw him. Not in shadow this time, not distant, close. He emerged from a shattered building, rifle raised, movements precise, practiced. Their eyes met through the chaos. Recognition flared. Her chest seized. Time fractured again, the gunfire fading into a dull roar behind her heartbeat. He hadn't changed, not in the way he moved, not in the way his eyes found her. But there was something else there now. Not mercy, not camaraderie, something colder. He didn't fire. Neither did she. They just stared, locked across the chaos. And then he turned, vanishing into the ruins with a small squad at his back. Her breath broke, chest aching. The rifle trembled in her grip. Move, the colonel roared. Push through. The unit advanced, step by bleeding step, through the storm. By the time silence fell again, the street was littered with smoke and bodies. The men regrouped, faces pale, eyes hollow. They were winning ground, but losing themselves. As they paused to catch breath, Callahan cornered her, voice sharp. "You knew," he hissed. "You saw him again, didn't you?" Her silence betrayed her. Callahan's eyes blazed. "Tell me the truth. Who is he?" No more half answers. The others were listening now. The colonel too, his stare like stone. Her throat closed, her hands clenched. The storm had reached the walls. There was no space left to hold it. She opened her mouth. But memory rushed in first. The night he'd saved her, the lessons he'd taught, the oath he'd whispered, "You don't give up, not ever." And the day it broke. Orders came. A mission turned gray. Civilians in the crossfire. She had hesitated, refused the shot, and he had taken it without pause. She looked at him in horror. He looked back with eyes already changing. That was when the cracks began. And now here he was, on the other side of the rifle. Her voice broke free, rough, raw. "He was mine, my partner, my brother in all but blood, and now he's the one hunting us." The words hung heavy in the air. The men stared. The colonel's jaw flexed, a muscle twitching. Callahan's face was a storm itself, torn between fury, disbelief, and something softer, betrayal. Silence pressed. Finally the colonel spoke, voice like steel dragged across stone. "Then he knows us. He knows our tactics, our weaknesses, which means if you're not ready to end him." His eyes cut into her. "You're already a liability." The words pierced deeper than any bullet. The men shifted uneasily. Suspicion had turned into open fracture. She lowered her head, heart pounding, chest caving. But then she breathed deep. The storm steadied. Her voice rose, quiet but firm. "I'll end it." The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire. Callahan searched her eyes, looking for a lie. He didn't find one. The colonel gave a sharp nod. "Then prove it. Next time he shows his face, you don't hesitate, or I'll make sure someone else pulls the trigger." The order landed like a final nail. She bowed her head, but inside the storm screamed. Because she knew, ending him wasn't just a mission. It was killing the last piece of herself she had left. And she didn't know if she could survive that. The world had narrowed to one road. It stretched jagged through the ruins, a scar of broken stone and twisted rebar. Ahead, the horizon glowed faintly with smoke, the sky painted in bruised shades of gray and fire. The colonel drove them hard, his voice a whip, every order sharper than the last. His desperation bled through now, no longer hidden. He wanted it finished, needed it. The men followed, but they moved like ghosts, drained, silent, steps heavy as if every boot carried not just weight but memory. They, buried too much already in these streets. And she walked with the storm finally breaking inside her. Callahan stayed near, never far, his eyes always on her. There was no more pretense. He knew the truth, and now he waited for her to choose. The colonel raised his hand, signaling halt. Ahead, the ruins shifted, shadows moving where none should. "They're waiting," he muttered, his jaw clenched. "This ends here." The unit fanned out, rifles ready. The silence before the storm was thick, almost suffocating. And then it broke. Gunfire erupted, a wall of sound. The street lit with muzzle flashes. Shouts tore the air apart. Bullets screamed off stone. The world collapsed into chaos. She moved with instinct, rifle snapping to shoulders, shots clean, precise. Dust and smoke wrapped the battlefield. The air was hot with fire, sharp with the stench of blood and powder. But her eyes searched only for him. And then she found him. Not in shadow, not distant, close. He stepped into the open, deliberate calm amidst the storm. His rifle hung low, his eyes locked on hers. Time slowed. Around them, men fought and bled. The colonel roared orders, Callahan shouted warnings. The world was fury and fire, but between her and him, silence. She saw the man he had been, the one who had lifted her from the rubble, taught her patience, steadied her hands when she shook, the one who had whispered, "Don't give up." And she saw the man he was now, hardened, cold, an enemy wrapped in the same face that had once been her anchor. Her rifle trembled, her breath broke. He tilted his head just slightly, as if to ask a question without words. Would she fire? Would she kill the last piece of herself? Callahan's voice tore through the storm. "Do it." Her finger hovered against the trigger. And in that suspended moment, she remembered everything, the rain-soaked missions, the whispered lessons, the fracture that split them when mercy failed and obedience won. Her chest ached, her eyes burned. She exhaled. Her shot cracked the silence. He staggered, eyes wide, not with shock but something else, recognition, understanding. He fell slowly, as if even gravity mourned. The world roared back into motion. Gunfire, shouts, chaos, but she didn't hear it. She only saw him lying there, the life bleeding from the man who had once been her shield. Callahan pulled her back just as bullets struck the wall near her head. His grip was firm, grounding, but his eyes were different now. Not suspicion, not fury, just weight, the kind that knew what it cost her. The colonel pushed them forward, shouting for advance. The unit surged, momentum fueled by desperation and loss. She followed, legs moving but her chest hollow. The battle dragged brutal and long, but eventually silence fell again. Smoke lifted. The ruins lay still. They had won, if victory meant surviving. The colonel gathered the men, voice hard, eyes already turning to maps, the next step, the next fight. He didn't look at her long. For him, the mission was all that mattered. But Callahan did. He said nothing. He just met her eyes. In his gaze was no glory, no triumph, only the understanding of what she had given up, what part of herself she had buried in that shot. The men moved, gathering gear, tending wounds, silent in their exhaustion. She sat apart, her rifle across her knees, eyes on the horizon where smoke faded into pale light. Her chest still burned, but inside the storm was gone. Not peace, not healing, just absence. Sometimes silence is louder than screams. Sometimes strength is not in what you keep, but in what you let go. She thought of him one last time, his voice, his hand steady on hers, the lessons etched into her bones. And then she let the silence hold him. The ruins around her seemed to listen too, as if the broken stones knew what it meant to carry loss without words. The colonel barked orders again. The men rose, the mission moved. But she stayed still for a moment longer, eyes steady, back straight. Because dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And then she stood. The screen fades to silence.